president of the Philosophy Club, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Alexis Elder. She is a Connecticut native and a product of its public higher education system. After getting hooked on philosophy as an undergraduate at Southern Connecticut State University, she went on to earn her doctorate in philosophy at UConn before returning to Southern to get the next generation hooked as well. She's interested in social groups. What are they? How do they work? And why do they matter to us? She writes about friendships and other close-knit social groups and enjoys seeing how emerging technologies intersect with issues first explored in ancient philosophical traditions. So without further ado, Dr. Alexis Elder.
Thank you everybody for having me here. I'm really excited to talk about this and to hear what you think. So I'll talk for about half an hour and then open the floor up for questions and comments and look forward to the discussion. As the title suggests, I'm interested in social media and what makes for a good friendship. And I'm going to do so using one of my favorite philosophers, Aristotle, who was around way before social media. So there's going to be a little bit of sort of creative interpretation here, but we'll see what he thinks and see what we think falls out of his theory. So there we go. So my plan for today is to do a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about Aristotle's theory of friendship, and in particular the role that he sees for shared living in friendships. It's going to turn out to be kind of a key concept for him, even though it's not normally the way we talk about friendships. It seems to have been his own theory and not something that was common, that was a cultural issue. I'm going to show how we can take his concept of shared living and use it to think about social media. I'm going to run through a number of objections to the claim that friendships can exist, that good friendships can exist on social media. We'll see how many we can get through, but I've picked up 6 here, and we'll see which ones we want to talk about, and if we go through any too quickly, we will go back in the Q&A and focus on those. Then I'll talk a little bit, the formatting got wonky there, talk a little bit about how we can use some Aristotelian guidance about how to live a good life, to think about ways to manage relationship issues online, including when you should block your friends and when they should be upset that you block them. When and where it's okay to pressure your friends to join or use a social media system, and what happens when bad people team up online. And then I'll conclude with some more general thoughts about friendship and social media, and we'll see what we think. So first, Aristotelian friendship. Aristotle's a big fan of friendship, as are many of us. And I think this isn't surprising given that we, many other creatures, are social animals. He points out that for human beings, it seems like most of us, if we thought about it a little bit, would opt for the life with friends over the life without. Even if the life without friends had all the other goods, which suggests that friendship matters intrinsically to us, that it's not just something that we value because it gets us other goods, but it matters for its own sake. And this, he thinks, gives us reason to think a little bit more carefully about how friendship works, so we can have the best friendships possible, so we can have the happiest lives on our own terms. And to this end, he points out that we need to distinguish between different kinds of friends. We want to distinguish kinds because we use the word friendship both to describe just a few people in our lives. Right? We want to talk about finding out who your true friends are, or who's really your friend when the chips are down. But we also use the term very loosely, both today, when we have 800 Facebook friends and so on. But also in his day, it was a term you could use for the person you were sort of friendly with in the halls or waved hi to on the street. So he wants to use a distinction between different kinds of friends to help make sense of both our wide and restricted uses of the term. Utility friends, as he puts it, are those we value for their usefulness. Maybe people, if you miss a class, you can count on them to give you notes, and vice versa. Maybe, if you go away, they water your plants for you, and they pick up your mail, or you pick up their mail for them. You might not like them very much as individuals, but it's useful for you to be in this kind of arrangement with them. And so they're not like the best kind of friends, but they are somebody that you might, that is a category of friendship that we should recognize. And there's not necessarily anything bad about it. And this is kind of a key concept for Aristotle, even though nowadays we'll sometimes say of a friend, they're just using you as if that means they're a bad kind of friend. He says as long as everybody is aware of the arrangement and is okay with it, there's nothing intrinsically terrible about it, but we should also recognize that that's not the ideal in friendship. Another kind kind of friend is the friend we value for the pleasure we take in their company. Sometimes it's because we have similar tastes in music or in entertainment. Sometimes it's because we like their sense of humor and they like ours. But just any kind of relationship where the good we get out of each other's company is pleasure. And while both of those can be fine things to have in life, the best kind of friendship he thinks is a virtue friendship. Virtue is a technical term for him. It doesn't have anything to do with not having a lot of sex as it's come to be associated with post-Victorian age. It just means people who have very good character. And virtue friends are the people you value not just for what you can get from them, like on points 1 and 2, but who you value as good in themselves. And that means we need to say a little bit about why virtue friends are good. Well, his account is that virtue friends are the people we share our lives with. And in doing so, each becomes what he says is another self to the friend. And there's a lot that can be said about what exactly it means to say that someone is another self. I ended up writing a dissertation about it because I couldn't get it out of my head. We can talk about that some more if you like. But the sort of rough and ready way to think of this is that friends are the people we think about like we think about ourselves. So if something good happens for them, it's like something good happening to us. If something bad happens to them, it's like something bad happened to us. And so we share this kind of bond, and we want to live with them. Although that doesn't mean necessarily that we want to have a virtue impression of them. So that means we need to get a closer sense of, or a more precise sense of what's going on when we live with someone in this way. One way that we can interpret this, if we look at Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, is to think that by expanding what you consider yourself, that is, if you expand your scope of concern beyond your narrow self-interest to include other people's as well, you have more opportunities for a good life than is available alone. Even if you're having a crummy day, then if your friend is having a good day, that can give you a new dimension along which you can do well. So this is actually an argument, a self-interested argument against selfishness. That by having friends and expanding your scope of concern, you end up having greater opportunities for happiness than when you have a sort of narrower focus and fewer things to make you happy. Now this has a flip side. It makes you more vulnerable because if something bad happens to them, that can happen to you as well. But he thinks the greater scope of concern is ultimately what's good for us as human beings, and that explains why we find the shared life attractive. So, what is it that goes on in this shared life? Well, Aristotle says friends share lives or live together by, as he puts it, sharing conversation and thought, not grazing in the same field like cattle. That is, we share our lives when we share the portions of our lives that are distinctively human and valuable for us, not necessarily by cohabiting in the same space. And he said this over 2,000 years ago, so it's clearly already on his radar that we needed to distinguish what it takes to be active with a friend from all the different aspects of life. But I'm going to take this and use that to think about social media, because I think this has some pretty big implications. He thinks that friends share lives, just to sort of restate the obvious, by sharing distinctively human activities such as reasoning and thought and perception, and especially those activities which particular people value. We're not bestest friends with anybody we happen to have a conversation with, but with the people we share those activities which matter most to us as individuals. So, this is kind of a big quote, but I'll talk us through it a little bit at a time. Here's what Aristotle says at the conclusion of his discussion on friendship in the Nicomachean Ethics. Whatever somebody's existence means to each partner, that is each friend individually, or whatever is the purpose that makes his life desirable, that's what he wishes to pursue together with his friends. So not just any old activity, but the thing that matters most to you. And then he runs through a list of examples. And you can't beat this list of examples for things that, make somebody's life worth living. His first example is that some friends drink together. You get the sense people haven't changed that much in 2,000 years. Some people drink together, some people play dice together, you could say gambling here, more generally. Others play sports together, or hunt together. Some join in the study of philosophy together. Whatever each group of people loves most in life, in that activity they spend their days together. For since they wish to live together with their friends, they follow and share in those pursuits which they think constitute their life together. So here he's being pretty open-ended with the different activities that friends could share, and what makes it a good activity for you to share with your friends is that you think it matters to you. As it happens, if you read some more of Aristotle, he gives an account of what he thinks the best life for human beings actually is. So if it turns out that drinking is bad for you and it's going to keep you from living the best possible life, then friends who share the drinking life together are not actually helping each other live good lives, and the life they share is actually bad for both of them. But here I'm really just interested in the structural features. We can come back to bad friendships later in the talk. So, can we find a shared life online? Well, it looks to me like people can share activities that are characteristic of human beings online perfectly well. We can play games online. We can share creative projects online, right? Flickr is a nice resource for photography enthusiasts to swap and critique photos. People play all sorts of games together. People share experiences together, right? If you are watching a movie or listening to a song and you think your friend likes it, you can pass it along to them. It's too small to read, but it's actually a screen cap of a conversation on Facebook where different philosophers are talking about how to teach John Stuart Mill to their classes. So it looks like lots of the things that we value as human beings we can do online with other people. Maybe not in the same physical space, maybe not even at the same time, but sharing the rational, creative, playful, human portions of our lives. And that seems to be a good thing. We're not cows, so maybe it shouldn't bother us so much that this takes place at a distance and using technology. That's one of the things humans do, is we build tools and we adapt them and we modify things to serve whatever our interests and purposes are. So it's a pretty straightforward argument, right? If what matters for friendship is sharing the valuable portions of our lives online, and the valuable portions of our lives can be had online, then I see no reason to object to social media as a basis for excellent Aristotelian friendship. But we're only a few minutes into the talk, and a lot of people are not convinced by this, so I propose we take a look at some objections so I can bring on board the skeptic and hopefully flesh out a little bit more detail of Aristotle's theory as we go. So the first objection that people tend to make to the thought that you can have good friends online is known as the I call it the privacy objection. And the idea is that social media exchanges are usually public or semi-public, right? If you post something on a friend's wall, everybody can see it. If you see something on Twitter, most of the world can see that. James Moore, who works a lot on online privacy issues, points out that information online is what he calls greased. It means it passes from place to place or hand to hand really easily. So even if it's sort of behind some privacy settings, you should just assume that anything you say online could, in theory, end up before the eyes of the world. And if we think that friendship can't thrive without the capacity to confide secrets, which is something people have pointed out, then it looks like social media makes programs for friendship. So runs the objection. But I'm not convinced. So one thing I know is that many social media platforms give you private communication channels as well as public ones. Some, like Snapchat, make it really easy to keep information directed at one person at a time and make it not impossible, but more difficult for information to slip from hand to hand. But even if you use a fairly public system like Facebook, there are private messaging systems so that you can have conversations away from the prying eyes of the public. But more importantly, I think even when conversations are public, they can still constitute important parts of a friendship. And my classic example of this is just having a conversation with a friend at a party. The fact that you're having it in public doesn't mean your friendship is cheapened. And if having conversations online is analogous to having a conversation at a party, then it looks like privacy isn't necessarily a threat to having good friendships online. Another objection has to do with the superficiality of online communications. Andy Warhol announced that he was a deeply superficial person. Not really relevant, but I just wanted to figured I would share it with you. So the real objection goes something like this. Public postings address everyone or everyone on your list of friends simultaneously, but no one in particular. So we have this kind of broadcast, right? You're just saying things to everyone generically, but no one particularly. But if friendship calls for a really rich, personalized interaction with some particular individual, then it looks like social media isn't good for this. Paul Bloomfield over at UConn has run this kind of objection. So what can I say to that? Well, I think that we need to think a little bit more clearly about offline modes of communication and see if we can find a model that we can use from offline to think about how to properly and responsibly conduct online conversations. So, to return again to the point, right, you can have individualized conversations online. There's no in-principle barrier to that. But also, even if you're talking in public, that doesn't mean you need to use a broadcast format. And I prefer to think about online postings, public postings, as being like implicit invitations to others to converse. So imagine you're at a party and you're having a conversation with somebody. There's this kind of implicit invitation that anybody else who overhears you and thinks that what you're talking about is interesting could join in. If we're talking about cooking, I love food. Right? If I'm talking about cooking with somebody and somebody else goes, oh, you know, carrots, I love carrots. And comes up and starts talking about carrots, you know, that's cool. I don't need to have a conversation in private for it to be a conversation with a person. And if I post something on Twitter, it might be directed at a particular person, but with the intention that if somebody else sees it and thinks it's interesting, they're welcome to join in too. So if that sounds compatible with friendship generally, then I don't see a special problem for friendships on social media. Good, friendly, social media usage conveys some kind of implicit invitation to interact, but that's not a problem. Another objection we commonly run into is what's called the commercialization objection. And there's this thought that, you know, most social media platforms are making money off of people's friendships, and that seems somehow problematic. Now, figuring out what the somehow is can be a complicated process. So what I've done here is broken it down into three sort of major ways to complain. First is the thought that there was something qualitatively weaker about friendships that are conducted online, especially on commercial platforms where someone else is benefiting. I'm not totally sure how that's supposed to work, which is going to be part of my response, but I'm throwing it out there, and again, I invite you to sort of flesh out the criticism if you think I haven't fully addressed it. You might worry that having exchanges with friends online puts friends at risk for privacy violations. And it looks like if we're going to interact through some medium where the space is provided to us at the cost of selling us to advertisers, then that's encouraging friends to serve as products that'll be sold for somebody else's benefit, and that might look problematic. So, because I've split the objection into multiple pieces, there are a few different directions I can go. But my strategy is going to be similar to what you've seen already. I'm going to say, well, what are the offline analogies? Do those look problematic for friendship? If not, then I don't think we need to be especially fearful here either. So in other contexts, making money for a proprietor doesn't necessarily seem to cheapen friendship. My favorite example of this is open mic nights, right? If your favorite coffee house decides, or bar, or what have you, decides to have an open mic night, and you go with your friends and you perform some art that you've been working on, you're serving as a draw so that other people will come and spend money for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with you and you're having fun. I do think that there are some serious concerns about privacy violations and that some companies behind some of the major social media platforms have been behaving unethically, but I want to be careful with blame here. I think that it's them doing the wrong and not people using the system. And again, the fact that people can overhear what you're saying or extrapolate from what you're saying to other facts about you isn't necessarily an obstacle so long as we hold that you can have conversations with your friends in public. This, I think, is at the heart of a lot of concerns about interactions online. It's the deceptiveness objection, and the thought is that you can't really know what's behind the mask people present with their online personas, and that somehow erodes trust in a way that's problematic. So we can deceive people online both by deliberately misrepresenting the facts. You know, oh yeah, I got my PhD from what's the big school these days? Princeton. But also, and maybe a little bit more sort of treacherously, because we like to present the polished and most impressive version of ourselves online. So the pictures we post are going to be the most flattering ones, and the facts we share about our day are not going to be about our failures, but about our successes and so on. So this can sort of lead to a false view of who we are and what we're like, and that seems to imply that trust in online interaction should be minimal. Well, then the argument from there goes, if trust is important for friendship, and that seems like something we ought to think is true, then online friendships seem weaker than face-to-face ones. but I say, well, trust is not guaranteed in face-to-face interactions as well. This is a fellow trying to sell you a watch that he found that fell off a truck. And in fact, we know that some kinds of deception are easier to pull off in person, especially those that rely on nonverbal cues. So we know that con artists, for example, will use invading your personal space or physical contact or facial expressions and tone of voice to manipulate. But it's not just sort of predatory people, right? This is just something we do with people day to day. When we don't want to talk about something, we'll shift the way we're sitting or look a different direction and use that to steer the conversation. We're constantly manipulating each other by nonverbal means, and it's harder to do that online for a few reasons. One, we leave a paper trail online, so you can cross-check and cross-reference a little more easily than when you're just talking to some random person you met on the street. And second, it turns out that even without the nonverbal communication channels, when they do studies on people, they are actually quite good at detecting certain kinds of deception because word choice gives people away. That sign says caution, Freudian slip. But the general idea is that we're actually pretty good at subconsciously evaluating people through the way they phrase things. And that doesn't go away just because we're communicating by text rather than face-to-face. So, basic strategy, I want to say, look, deception is just a feature of human interactions. Sorry. So unless we want to say that deception makes it impossible to have face-to-face friendships as well, and that seems implausible, then we should just accept that as a cost of doing business. We're social creatures, and this is just one more way to be social. It has risks, but so do all ways of being social. The physicality objection runs something like this. Physical presence and physical contact are impossible through social media. That's kind of the advantage, right, is that you can talk to people that you're not in the same space with. But we value human contact. And again, this is something that social scientists and folks who are interested in ecology, right, we can point out that physical sharing of space and physical contact with others is actually a really important human good, and it's bad for us not to be around people. So if we value human contact and online friendships can't have that, then it looks like they're bound to be deficient relative to offline ones. And again, I say not so fast. When we think of friendships, we need to think of friendships as taking place within a network of different relationships. For something in a monogamous culture, marriage might mean that you only have one person with whom you're romantically intimate. But we don't think of friendships that way. We might talk about having your one best friend or something, but even there's usually a sense that it's okay to have different friends who fulfill different needs. So, given that not every face-to-face friendship involves physical contact, it doesn't seem to me to be an obstacle that your online friends won't necessarily be the ones with whom you have physical contact either. When this discussion was first run, it was at a conference in Europe, and this meant that you had a lot of people from very different cultures interacting with each other and debating about the importance of physical contact in friendship. So we had the French host who was very big on sort of you kiss everybody and you hug everybody, talking to the Finnish guy who was like, we don't touch. And not, no. And so when someone ran the physicality objection, Kai Kimpa said, does that mean I don't have any friends? I mean, because in Finland we don't do that. And I'm not sure I'm ready to go with the Finnish approach to friendship just yet, but I think I'm open to the possibility that different friends can fulfill different needs, and so long as that's true, then different people can fulfill different needs. And I think, just as a general rule of life, we shouldn't rely on one person to provide all our social goods. That one of the good things about friendship is the diversity of goods that we can get from different people. So it's not sufficient to say, well, you can't get this good from this person, therefore that person is a bad friend for you. That's just too quick. We shouldn't expect that from our friends anyway. I believe this is my last objection. So this is going to be sort of a variant on things that we've seen before, but it's a new way to sort of put some of the pieces together. So we'll see how that goes. The thought is that online communication is impoverished because it lacks nonverbal communication channels, things like expression, tone of voice, posture, and so on. And furthermore, that friends can't really share activities online. What they can do is talk about activities. So if I want to talk about music with my friends online. We're not going to be able to actually get together and play. We're just going to be able to say, hey, you know, at my last band rehearsal, here's what happened, or here's what my new instrument looks like. But that's not the same thing as actually having a jam session together. So we have this kind of stark picture of interactions online. And we find this in the literature. Shannon Ballard, for example, says the possibilities for sharing lives online look relatively impoverished if we grasp the distinction between sharing lives and sharing about lives. The former, sharing lives, involves performing together the activities that actually make up a life, while the latter involves communicating to one another information concerning our lives without implying shared activity. If that's right, then it looks like a lot of what I've said is going to be pretty badly undermined, so I need to have something to say to this. And my response is, well, first, we do share some activities directly online. I was told, actually, this is a bad example of a game. I need a more multiplayer-oriented game. But right, gamers actually share activities online. They don't just talk about gaming together. They actually play. So that looks like that's not going to work, at least for gaming online. This is not my my response originally. This comes from Nick Munn, who actually has a paper that specifically defends virtual worlds and immersive online virtual worlds as the only place where you can enjoy true Aristotelian friendship online. I think that's a little too strong, as we'll see, but I think it's a good example. So we can share online activities, not only games, but also things like journaling, right? Journaling is an activity, and we actually are encouraged to do it, and people study the benefits of journaling, and you can do that online. It even looks like if you're going to be engaged in journaling and reading other people's journals and talking about each other's online, that kind of introspection is something that you can share with other people. And it can actually shape your character, right? The whole point of that, engaging in that kind of reflective, I'm going to talk about what happened today, is because you do gain something from talking about it that you didn't get from living through it the first time. That kind of taking a step back and seeing how it all fits together is actually conducive to developing a mature character. And if it's something we do with our friends, then our friends can influence our character development. Also, I'm not sure I'm ready to say conversation isn't an activity. It was an example of Aristotle's, right? That's what people do. We're not cows. We talk together. Now, it's true that one person's poor replacement is another's rewarding activity, so I can't hike with my friends online still. We can talk about good places to hike, but that's not the same thing. But not everybody thinks that hiking is an intrinsically valuable activity. Some people do. But for other people, it might be just sort of the least unpleasant means to get exercise. And for them, maybe the really awesome activity to share is playing games. And you can imagine a group of hikers playing games to keep in contact in the off-season, but you can also imagine a group of gamers who hike together to make the hiking slightly more bearable. So I don't really want to decide, I don't really want to come down on one side versus the other just because one takes place online and the other takes place offline. I do think, again, that we're better at reading subtleties from text than the poverty of communication objection gives us credit for, and I think the existence of things like literature programs and fine arts programs emphasize just how much personality can come through the page, and fine grasp of language can allow us to communicate really rich emotions and experiences to each other, and I think that it sells language short to try to say that you need to be face-to-face with somebody in order to understand what they're thinking. And so we ought not to buy into the idea that textual communication is impoverished. This might just be my academic side coming through, right? I was a very roguish nerd all the way from sort of the time I learned to read on out, so I'm biased, I admit it, but I find it really hard to sign on to the idea that we can't bare our souls through text or something like that. And I think the burden is on the person who wants to undermine text as a means of communication. Now, this does mean that you need to be literate in order to have a good friendship online. But you need to be good at verbal communication in order to have good conversation, a good friendship face-to-face. You need to be good at reading facial cues. You need to be good at reading postural things. So the fact that we need a skill set in order to have good friendships is not something new. That's just a fact of life, according to Aristotle. The kinds of skills you need might vary depending on the context, but Aristotelian ethics is kind of famously open to that. So I have some other things to say, but I kind of want to end here, I think, for now. So that's probably plenty to talk about, and open the floor for questions. And if you want to talk about some of the other stuff, you had a sneak peek at that early, and we can always go back. let me turn it over to you. What should we talk about? Questions, comments, criticisms, objections, supporting examples? Yes?
I wanted to make an objection to the fact that you said you need to be good at reading to have an online friendship. That's not the case necessarily, because I see a lot of online friendships today. They're terrible at English. I'm very big on English. If I will not communicate with you, if you do not, if you have a terrible sense of English.
Good, good. So nice counterexample. Looks like people who are really not that good at sort of putting together sort of standard English sentences or spelling or punctuation or capitalization, nonetheless seem to get along just fine with each other online. I think there are a couple of ways we can go with this. First, to say that people are friends online is not necessarily to say that they're good friends online. And if they're not having these kinds of rich personalized interactions, then they might not be having excellent friendships online just because they're friends online. Now that's not a particular problem for online interactions, right? We have lots of pretty superficial friendships in person too. And we use lots of pretty scripted responses. Hey, how are you? Great. How about you? Not bad. Nice day. You know, like it doesn't all need to be personalized or particularized. So maybe those examples I can sort of deflect and say they're friendships, but they're not great friendships. The other response is to be a little bit less prescriptive about English and say that if these people really are having rich, rewarding, mutually enjoyable, mutually fulfilling exchanges online, then it turns out that we don't actually need to be sort of standard academic English snobs in order to have, I'll take the label on myself. It to you, but I don't need to be, you know, maybe I can't have a friendship with somebody like that online, but if they are capable, then it just shows that English has great expressive power, even when it's not expressed according to the standard rules. And that's kind of an empirical question.
To go along with what you said, you gotta realize that there's different meanings of English. There's the English that you learn in school and that you use big words and all that, but then there's texting English where you hyphenate everything and you abbreviate everything, and that bugs people, but you still gotta realize that it's coming into our day-to-day life, and we gotta figure out a way to change that.
So I was with you up until the last point. I guess I'm not sure that we need to change, or maybe for clarification, do we need to change our attitude towards English, or change the fact that it's splitting?
That it's splitting.
Okay. So then I do want to disagree. So I think that the fact that we use different specialized vocabularies and different specialized ways of speaking in different contexts is not a new problem. And if we look at language, this is just what people do, right? You get different dialects, you get different ways of expressing yourself that are appropriate to different contexts. The way I talk at